Hi guys, I went ahead and finished the homework from the book. We didn't do yesterday 38 through 50, so I wanted to go over those with you. Now, remember, your directions here say solve your equation and then tell which solution method you used. So all they're asking for is how did you factor it so that you could solve it? Because remember, when we talk about these quadratic equations, if they're factorable, then they're solvable, and then the solutions are your x-intercepts. Always remember those three things. So your directions are just asking you, okay, so you're going to have to solve. So then how did you solve? Did you just factor? Did you use a quadratic equation? What did you do so that you could get your solutions? So for number 38, I'm going to use the index card to cover up. So because I know yesterday my hand was in the way, so I'm going to try very hard not to do that. So for number 38, you're given x squared minus 3x minus 4 equals 0. And as soon as I saw that equation, I thought, well, let me just look and see if there's anything that multiplies together to give me 4 and adds together to give me 3. And remember, they're both negative. So I know then my signs have to be different and my larger number would have to be negative. So I know that a negative 4 and positive 1 would multiply to give me negative 4 and add together to negative 3. So I just went right to that factor then. So then, and if you're forgetting that, you can always FOIL and make sure that you did it right. So this was factorable. And then now you can solve. Remember, you're just set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve. So x is going to equal positive 4 and x is equaling negative 1. So those are my solutions. Remember, those would also be my x-intercepts, and I just factored. So that was number 38. Number 40. Number 40, we have my C is 65 and my B is negative 16. So if I look at that, I would have to see, okay, what can multiply together to give me 65 and add together to give me negative 16? So I was going through and I'm not seeing anything that's any factors of 65 are going to add to 16. So then I went straight to my quadratic equation. Now, you can use the quadratic equation for every factoring problem. If you need a factor, you can just go straight to quadratic. That's perfectly fine. So if you're struggling finding factors that multiply together to give you your C and add together to give you your B, you can go straight to the quadratic. It just takes more arithmetic to do that. But if you're more comfortable with that, you can do that for every problem. Okay, so anyways, I found my A to be 1, B to be negative 16, C to be 65. And now I'm just going to take those and plug those in to the quadratic formula. Now look, like I always say, I always have that written at the top of my page. So I even have it written here so that I always have that to refer to and to help me memorize the quadratic formula. So I'm going to plug that in. So remember, x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of your b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And so then I just plugged everything in and started solving. But now when I got down here and I was simplifying, I found that I was going to have that 256 minus 260, which gave me a negative 4 under the radical. And remember, we cannot have a negative under the radical. So as soon as I saw that, I knew that this was not factorable, and then there would be no solutions as my answer. So make sure that you're looking for that and that you're doing your arithmetic correctly so that you can see if there's that negative under the radical. And also remember that when you're plugging in, when you have that b squared, I always use my parentheses around my number. Okay, so that was number 40. Now I'm on 42. So we are given x squared minus 21x plus 84 equals 0. So I had to go over here and see what factors of 84 would add to give me 21. So I went through all my factors and I didn't see anything that was going to add up to be that negative 21. So I said, well, I'm just going to automatically go to the quadratic and solve that way. So I used the quadratic. My A was 1, B was negative 21, and C was 84. I plugged that in. I got 21 plus or minus the square root of negative 21 squared minus 4 times 1 times 84 over 2 times 1. So then I just kept simplifying. So then I have x equals 21 plus or minus the square root of 441 minus 336 over 2. And then again, just simplified and got x equals 21 plus or minus the square root of 105 over 2. Now, this was not going to be a perfect square here, so I knew I would get a decimal. So this would be my exact answer. Remember, our exact means that we don't have a decimal. So this would be my exact. It's the radical and simplest form. And then I did go over here just to show you the decimal form in case you're asked round to the nearest tenth or the nearest hundredth. Sometimes our book does. So if you use your calculator and plug this in, you would have 21 plus or minus 10.2 divided by 2. So your book is looking for the answer in radical form. This is just if you would plug that radical in. Okay, so then the next one was 44. We're given negative 16x cubed plus 4x equals 0. So this one reminded me of just the problems that we had notes on recently. And I saw that these terms both shared a 4 and a 6. So I thought, well, let me simplify that and pull that out of my expression first. So I factored out a negative 4x. So then I did 16x cubed divided by negative 4x and have a 4x squared left over. And then 4x divided by negative 4x left with me with a negative 1. So now I have, in simplified factored form, I have negative 4x times the quantity 4x squared minus 1. Now I'm looking at that and remember what I told you guys in the last set of notes. If you notice that there is a term that's squared and a negative in between, this could be a difference of squares and need to be factored even more. And look, 4 is a perfect square of 2, and x squared is clearly a perfect square of x. And then minus, that's the difference, and then that 1. 1 is a perfect square. So I know that I can factor this even more. So remember, this is saying 2x, that quantity squared, and this is just saying 1 squared. So this is just going to factor 2. The negative 4x has to come along for the ride. 2x plus 1 times 2x minus 1. And remember, that is just the formula for factoring the difference of squares. And this is why. I'll write this out for you. This is just like saying 2x, that quantity squared, minus 1 squared. That is what that equals. This 4x squared minus 1 can be written as the quantity 2x squared minus 1 squared. So the difference of two things being squared. And so then that's how you factor that. Negative 4x times the quantity 2x plus 1 times 2x minus 1. So I just feel like a lot of you can get to this point, but then won't recognize that this is a difference of squares and go to this point, which is very important for you to do. So now I can set each of these terms equal to 0 to solve. So I would have to say 2x plus 1 equals 0, 2x minus 1 equals 0, and negative 4x equals 0. All of these are terms that need to be set equal to 0 to be solved. So when I set those equal to 0, I get x equals negative 1/2 and x equals 1/2. And if I divide by 4 on both sides, I get x equals 0. So my solutions are x equals negative 1/2, x equals 1/2, and x equals 0. All right, go through that. Make sure that you're able to factor this difference of squares. All right, 46. This one looks terribly ugly because we have this 34x to the 4th minus 85x cubed plus 51x squared equals 0. So I see that the one thing that they all share are the x's. So I can factor out an x squared out of each term. So I'm going to do that just to make this slightly more simplified. So if I pull an x squared out, or factor it out, I'm left with 34x squared minus 85x plus 51 equals 0. Okay, so now if I'm looking at this and I need to factor this so that I can solve it, this has a leading coefficient other than 1, has that 34, and my c is 51. So this is one of those ones I would have to regroup. I would have to multiply these two together, add to see what equals 85, and those are really large numbers. So I don't even want to be bothered with that. I'm going to just automatically go to the quadratic formula here for this one, because I can still get the exact same answer. I'm just using the quadratic formula instead of factoring. So I just went A is 34, B is negative 85, and C is 51. And then I plugged it in. I'm still dealing with large numbers, but I'm not trying to find all of the factors of those large numbers, which could take me such a long time. So all I did was just plug everything in, and then I just started simplifying and solving. And then I was able to get down to x equals 85 plus or minus 17 over 68. And then I just plugged that into my calculator, and I got 1.5 and 1. But the only thing is this 0. That 0 came from all the way up here when I factored out that x squared. Remember that that's still a term that I have to set equal to 0. So I have to bring that down after I did the quadratic formula and say, well, x squared equals 0 and take the square root of both sides and then get x equals 0. So that's where that 0 comes from, because I can't forget about this factor that I had outside of my other simplified equation. Okay, that's 46. And then I'm on 48. Same thing up here. I have 18x squared minus 21x plus 28. And I thought there wasn't anything that they all shared that I could factor out. So immediately I thought, I'm just going to do the quadratic again, because although the quadratic is a pain, it's easier than trying to find factors of large numbers like this that's going to add up to your middle b. So I just used the quadratic. A is 18, B is negative 21, and C is 28. And then I just plugged in and started simplifying. But here, this is where you need to watch. So as I was simplifying under my radical, I had 441 minus 2016, and I knew right there that this was going to leave me with a negative under the radical, so there was no solution. So this is then not factorable, and we have no solution. So that was 48. And then 50. I had this negative 14x to the fourth plus 118x cubed plus 72x squared equals 0. Now, I didn't see anything that each of these coefficients shared, but I saw the x's. And as soon as you see that your leading coefficient is matched with a variable that is raised to an exponent greater than 2, always look to see if you can factor out x's so that your first term has an x squared or nothing higher. So that's what I did immediately. I'm saying, okay, everything is sharing an x, so I can factor out an x squared. So that's what I did. I factored out an x squared, so I'm left with negative 14x squared plus 118x plus 72. So these big numbers, I went right to the quadratic formula. A was negative 14, B is 118, and C is 72. And then I just kept solving, and this time I had a positive under the radical so I could finish solving it. And so then I end up with my x is negative 118 plus or minus 134 over negative 28. And then I solved. I just plugged into my calculator, and I got 0. I did this one by hand first, and I got negative 4/7. Now I know a lot of you are going to be irritated with that, so I plugged that in my calculator and got negative 0.57. I did leave it in factored form first, and then I got 9. Now again, where did this 0 come from? Because that x squared that I factored out at the beginning has to come down here and say x squared equals 0 as well. Take the square root, x equals 0. The negative 4/7 and 9 came from here with the quadratic when I plugged that in. So I know I went fast through that one, but you can always pause and go through if you're actually trying to solve that yourself. I just didn't want to take up too much of your time if you didn't need help with these. Now keep working on your practice worksheets that you have. Remember that you have a study island assignment due tomorrow by the end of the day, and I'm hoping that you guys are doing your Ready, Set, Goes each day. Please let me know if you have any questions, and we will continue with new notes next week. Also, remember, you have a pre-quiz in there. This just would be a good review for the chapter. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Have a good day, guys.